right, Tyler, I'm really excited about the prototype. Looking forward to seeing it. Had a couple other tissues that I want to share with you with regard to other ways you can use this both on the rig, both rig mounted and also by hand. There's a lot of potential, I think, to use it by hand, but I had one unique one that I wanted to share with you. So the first one is your Quadratus lumborum. If you don't know what Quadratus lumborum or QL is, it's a muscle that goes from the top of your pelvis, the pelvic crest, up to the 12th rib. So it's actually quite short and stout.
So breaking down the layers of the spine here, you see the lats coming down from the shoulder, this massive connection into the thoracolumbar fascia. You strip that away and you have your sort of three tenderloin-like erectors. These are the strong muscles that help us extend our spine and pick up heavy things. They have this also really strong connection into our pelvis and our sacrum down low. You can see the transverse abdominis, sort of the corset muscle, like the back brace muscle as it were, wrapping around all the way around the front to the other side. And then you strip that away, because you're kind of coming through transverse abdominis when you're coming into QL. But you strip that away, and then you're down sort of to the bare minimum here, where you have the upper part of the pelvis. You see this strong muscular attachment into the pelvis, going vertically up to the 12th rib. And so you have one of these on both sides, and they have this ability to kind of cause compression in the lumbar spine, especially when some of the smaller, deeper lumbar stabilizers aren't working well. This can get very tight and junky and full of trigger points. And because it's hard to get into within their tool without being super uncomfortable on these lower floating ribs, having something to dig in there, get the upper section, come down, get the lower section, and then get in and open those fibers up. Is super helpful.
So the lumbar spine, it kind of has this compressive effect on the lumbar spine. And it's really nice tissue to be able to get into along its length. I have it curved down right now so I can get right to the edge of my pelvis, top edge of my pelvis, and kind of hook down into it. And QL is going to be, well, you saw in the anatomy book, it's going to be more like off to the side, kind of in the soft meat, in that small space between the pelvis and the ribs. And you're going to find you can get in there and really get to the insertion down low, or you can flip the thing over so it's curved up, and then you can get up by the 12th rib in the upper section, which tends to have a bigger influence on the front of the body, the hip flexor quad part of the body, rather than the back of the body, the glute, hamstring, calf, posterior chain. Just because of the nature of the lumbar spine, the upper mid lumbar spine will create the femoral nerve or form the femoral nerve going down the front of the hip. The lower lumbar spine will form the sciatic nerve going down the back of the hip. So depending on what part of the QL you get into, you'll get a different effect. And this is a super intense, amazing area to get into because of it's almost like a little nervy, and it has this like amazing burny like referral feeling into different parts of your body, everywhere from the front of the hip to down the leg. It's a super rich area to mobilize. Then I'm going to turn it vertical so it curves like toward my back, and I'm going to lean into it. So now it almost fills the space between my pelvis and my ribs, so I can get into that whole length of the muscle and push it in and kind of bend it back towards my spine. And once I get it pinned, I can have this little bit of like lean away, ART sort of stretch where I get in there, I get it pinned just like the hip flexor before in a shortened position, and then I open up and I lengthen it out, which feels pretty good. I can also grab the bar or the rig in the case of the shorter prototype, and I can pull myself toward it to increase pressure as I mess around with the angle. And for me right there, it's just like unbelievable. I just feel it light up my whole leg. Beautiful. It's like this warm feeling down through my leg. So that's number one. Let me show you the diaphragm. Now the diaphragm is a also unique tissue because it's very hard to access. Generally in the clinic, I'll use my fingers in the similar shape and I'll get up underneath the ribs to get to as much of the diaphragm in the front as I can. The diaphragm though is the separator. It's almost like a drum between the upper chamber of our trunk where the lungs are and the lower chamber of our trunk where our organs are. and it's moving air as we're breathing, ideally, if we're breathing well. Moving air up and down. As I take a breath in, diaphragm moves down. As I exhale, diaphragm moves back up, and in doing so, it's moving air in and out of our lungs to oxygenate our blood.
All right, hopefully this isn't getting too sciencey for you. You can see now we're back with psoas in the front and iliacus, which we mobilized last time. This is with all the organs removed, and this is the lumbar spine, the low back, looking from the front through the body. You come up to the top and there's this massive dome of muscle, which is the diaphragm. Above that is the lungs, below that is the organs, and you can see how the psoas almost has like a direct connection up into the fascia. Some people describe it as like a cobra, which I think is super cool anatomically, but the muscle comes up from the hip and then wraps forward as the diaphragm. And you can see this works as a placeholder too. Now we're looking up at the diaphragm from below. This is the lumbar spine, kind of looking back up underneath the rib cage. This is the front of the rib cage here, and what we're looking to do is get up along this line on both sides and fascially release the diaphragm when it gets adhered or stuck. This is the sternum, like the xiphoid process right in the middle, and all this muscular connection is fair game. It has an impact potentially on blood flow through the massive descending aorta down into the legs. It has impact on the digestive system, digestive function, but most importantly, it has impact on breathing, as this dome, which in this view would be concave, as you breathe in, it comes down and expands down into the abdomen. And this is just massively important when it comes to breathing. So that's the tissue we're working on.
For a lot of people, it can get very restricted and bound in the front. It keeps them from being able to fully open up and do extension when they're pulling from the floor, or when they're doing a heavy lift and trying to reach full extension, or when they're kipping, swinging a kettlebell. But it also is important when it comes to breathing and being able to move air in and out. If the diaphragm's restricted, because it is a muscle, it's not going to be moving as much air as we'd like it to. So generally I'll use this sort of in this curved forward orientation, starting really close to the midline, and this is how you'd use it as a hand tool to kind of push up into your own diaphragm. And just like all these other tissues, it's got a very unique feel to it. It's quite intense. Sometimes it almost makes people nauseous, but I'm going up. I'm going like just under my ribs and then angling it up into the diaphragm. And for some people it feels fibrous, it feels kind of gnarly, and it'll make it a little hard to take a breath. Along the line of my lowest rib, coming all the way around to as lateral a point as I can, where I'll run into like the floating ribs, the 11th and 12th ribs down below. But I can really get in there, and I can even kind of lean into it a little bit to open that up. Now as I breathe, every time I breathe out, I can push the mobility tool a bit deeper, so I can get up and release the fascia. I'm basically like peeling the diaphragm fascia away from the rib cage on the inside. One of my favorite tricks to fascially release this is to start people in like a slouch position, which puts the muscle, both the abs, which are kind of in the way if they're tight or if people are guarding, protecting, kind of puts them on slack, allows me to get up deep into the diaphragm. I'll take a few breaths. Every time I exhale, I go in a little deeper. And then after I do a bunch of those, I'll take a big breath in, which pushes the diaphragm down. And then I'll sit up really tall, and I have the diaphragm pinned, and I'm flaring the ribs up and peeling the diaphragm away to create more space, to help people better be able to open up through the front of their rib cage, take deeper breaths down into their belly. And this could hook into the whole idea of diaphragmatic breathing and how people are trying to breathe less shallow, breathe less in their necks, and breathe more down into their abdomen, where they not only get more blood flow to their legs, but they also just get more oxygenated blood overall to their whole body. And when we go hard, when we're exercising hard in the CrossFit gym, many of us start to breathe shallow. We're not getting full breaths. We're not breathing in as healthy a way. So I think getting people in touch with not only how it feels to mobilize their diaphragm, where it is, free it up from adhesions, but then also teaching people how to then properly breathe, which is a hot topic right now in lots of sports. The diaphragm and the QL, I mean really all these muscles, but those two have big implications for other types of athletes as well, especially running athletes, endurance athletes, which when I started my career was sort of my bread and butter. So I'm always sort of thinking about how to improve the performance of endurance athletes outside of CrossFit. And I think all these muscles have big implications. They're buzzwords. And these are buzzwords that my endurance athletes that I treat bring in, and they're familiar with those, and they're talking about those as trouble areas and areas that are really hard for them to treat on their own. So at risk of putting myself out of business here, but I'm excited to get some feedback from you on these new techniques, and I can't wait to see the prototype. I'm very excited to connect it to the rig and start messing around, not only attached to the connector, but also to detach it. And I'm going to keep working on getting more techniques that are either partner techniques where someone else can do this for you, which I think is the obvious reason that you disconnect this, but also self-mobility techniques where a sharper, narrower, longer surface is appropriate to release hard to reach tissues, and maybe even more obscure tissues that you could use another mobility tool to access, but maybe wouldn't think to, or maybe are too hard to access with anything other than this shape. So yeah, let me know what you think, Tyler, and look forward to talking soon. Bye.